Thank you for that warm introduction. First thing first, before I start, I just want to extend my warmest appreciation for everybody who is here on this Saturday afternoon. So my topic for the day is obviously on China. We're going to tackle a few key concepts here. First of all, I think it's important for us to understand what are the issues with China. So we're going to talk about the property sector problems. We're going to talk about the US-China tension. But also more importantly, I do want to give everyone an understanding of what are the key drivers of the Chinese market right now and why we should be optimistic about China at this point in time. Okay, so let's start out with this chart here. So to me, from my perspective, I really like this chart. So this is a chart with data that spans 2,000 years. So there are not many charts out there in the world that actually can give you 2,000 years of data. So what this chart essentially does is, it actually gives you the GDP or the global economy market share of all the major countries in the world over 2,000 years. So obviously, in the last 400-500 years, we got very good data. But before that, how do you get data at 1 AD? 1 AD, how do you get data? So this slide was prepared in conjunction with obviously historians and obviously economists. Okay, so what am I trying to show on this chart here? So you can see on this chart, very colorful. We have China, which is denoted in purple. We have India, denoted in orange. And we have Japan, Europe, UK, and US. So we can see, let's start off from here, 1 AD. 1 AD. So at that point in time, 2,000 years ago, which economies are actually dominating the world? So from this chart, you can see very clearly, big proportion of it is in China. And the other big proportion is in India. So Asia, 2,000 years ago, were the ones that were dominating the global economy. But obviously, a lot of things has changed since 2,000 years ago. You can see quite clearly, right? As time goes by, especially in the 1800s, 1900s, who dominated? The Western countries. So you can see quite clearly US, UK, Europe dominating. But I do want to highlight what is happening in recent years. You can see in recent years, there's been a very clear inflection point. So when people ask me, why am I so passionate? Why am I so positive about Asia? I point to this chart because this is real structural trends that is happening over decades, happening over centuries. And you can see quite clearly over the last few decades, China is obviously growing massively, and so is India. And the other more important takeaway you can take from here is that I think it's high time that Asia is finally retaking the lead in the global market share of the global economy. Right? As you can see, the Western world is obviously losing their dominance as well. I'm sure all of you are well aware of that. So I think this chart is very interesting. 2,000 years of data, putting it in very colorful form, what is happening in the world right now. So if you look at this from this perspective, you can imagine why I'm so positive about China and why I'm so positive about Asia. And moving on, I like to tackle the difficult problems right at the start of my presentation. So let's talk about the US-China tension. Okay, so this is my little contribution to AI-generated images, right? So AI can technically save the world, cure cancer, and here I am making this. Okay, so this is what we obviously wish. This is obviously what we wish. Can US and China ever be best friends, or in this case, more than friends? And obviously the answer is no. It's difficult. I think this is the real world that we are living in. Right? We have to accept it. So for us at RHB Asset Management, so we manage one of the largest China funds in Malaysia, RHB BCAP China Fund. Right? So for us, we have long accepted that this is the reality. US and China can never be like this. So it can only exist in the AI imaginary world. This is what we wish. this is what we get. This is what we get, right? So end of the day, these two gentlemen here, this is Donald Trump. By the way, this is from his mugshot. This is real from his mugshot. You know that he's in a lawsuit right now, right, with a porn star. So very exciting, right? So this is actual mugshot. And this is our dear Mr. Biden, which is glitching half the time, right? So who will prevail? Nobody knows, right? Well, chances are it's probably going to be Donald Trump. Looking at where things are going. So there are talks that our dear friend Mr. Biden is going to drop out. But at the end of the day, whether it's Mr. Biden or Donald Trump, it's the same thing. Both the Democrats and the Republicans all would want to keep China down. That's for sure. So for us at IHB Asset Management, we have embraced it. So this is the new reality. And probably the new reality for decades to come. It might even be centuries. Right? So we have also structured our portfolio so that we can benefit because of this. So for those who ask me, who are dying to ask me, would it be better if Donald Trump is in the White House or if Biden is in the White House? To me, it makes no difference. It makes no difference. America will want to keep China down because China is right now arguably number 2 guy. So the top dog doesn't want a number 2 guy to take over, but obviously he has to keep him down. Right? So at the end of the day, we have to embrace the US-China tension. We have to try to make sure that we can make money despite the US-China tension. And I can share with you some of the ways that we are doing it. Okay? So some of you may be asking, right now it's presidential election time, lots of tariff. Trump is saying 60% on everything that is exported from China to the US. This is actual tariff implemented by the Biden's administration. Just recently, you can look at the date, 15th of May, just a couple of weeks ago, just before the whole presidential debate started. So obviously this was the last missile that Biden launched against China so that he can, have something to say during the presidential debate to show how tough he is against China. So he's trying his best. That's my point. But the problem with this is, this tariffs and this tension is not new. Right? This has been going on for the last 8 years. How many of us here are not aware of the US-China tension? And I'm very sure, I don't think there's anybody who's not aware here, especially for those of you who have taken the trouble to wake up on a Saturday morning to come all the way here. So you guys are all, well educated, well informed. Right? Everybody knows there's US-China tension. Everybody has heard about the tariffs. So at the end of the day, right, you might not realize it, but it has been 8 long years. It has been 8 long years of tariff when we are talking about sanctions, trade barriers, trade tariffs, right? The tech war. It has been 8 long years. So a lot of things has already happened over the last 8 years. And this is Biden's last present to China, right? The tariff. But if you ask me, right, how significant are these tariffs? And my short answer is, it's all but no bite. Despite the fact that obviously the whole US press went to town with it. They're very happy. Biden is bashing China. But if you look at the actual impact, you will notice it's actually very minimal. Despite the fact there's 18 billion, right? In actual fact, it's only 0.5% of total global exports of China. 0.5%. And one of the key tariff that they put on was on EV, right? Was on EV. Previous chart will show you for EV, they actually upped the electric vehicle from 25% to 100%. 100% tariffs. It makes for a great headlines. 100% tariff, But in actual fact, like I said, it's all but no bite. Why? You can see on this slide here, EV. Chinese EV to the US is only 1%. 1% of China's total exports of EV to the whole wide world. In other words, what does it mean? It means it doesn't matter. You can up it to from 25 to 100 to 200 to 300 to 600. It makes no difference anyway because only 1% of China's EV exports actually make it to the US. I'm sure it's sensible, right? Because no Americans want to buy Chinese EVs anyway. Right? So it doesn't really matter. Great for headlines, but in actual fact, the ultimate impact is actually quite minimal. So that's why I'm saying it's all bark, no bite. And it's important for me to highlight this because over the next few months, quarters, you will hear a lot of this news. Two of them will be competing to see which one can outbash China. And right now, it's all talk only. Talk is cheap, right? Talk is cheap because end of the day, Biden has probably done his last bit in terms of his tariff on China. And for Trump, it's even easier. Just talk only. He's not the president yet anyway. Right? So, the point I want to highlight to everybody is this. You will hear bad news. Bad news. They will continue to bash China. But the point I want to highlight to everybody is the market doesn't care. Because, end of the day, all bark, no bite. Okay? Moving on. So what has happened in China over the last few years? I'm sure all of us are well aware. We heard about the crackdown on the Chinese internet sector. We heard about the crackdown on Ma Yun, so that's why Ma Yun is in Singapore. We have heard about the crackdown on the Chinese tuition centers in China. So Chinese tuition, unlike Chinese kids, not Chinese kids, Asian kids in Asia, whether you are in Singapore, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, all the kids all go for tuition, except for Chinese kids. Chinese kids, they are not allowed by law to have tuition after school. Right? So we know that all these things are happening over the last few years. We all also know that there are talks about common prosperity. In my opinion, common prosperity means common poverty. If everybody is rich, then nobody is rich. Okay. So at the end of the day, right, policies like what I mentioned earlier were all highly restrictive and was all implemented over the last 2-3 years. Right? During the time when Xi Jinping was coming up for his third term. So those policies very, very popular with the Chinese population. Right? Everybody loves to bash billionaires. Right? So it was well regarded and well liked by the Chinese population. But I also want to highlight to you, things have changed 180 degrees. So on this slide here, very simple headlines from South China Morning Post, right? Xi Jinping, once again, is signaling that economy is his priority. And in fact, he has been signaling this for the last 6 months or so. Things are changing in China. From very, very restrictive policies in internet, in property, in education, 180 degrees shift. Now, it's all stimulative, and he is trying to make sure that he's driving the economy the right way. Okay, so this is the headlines. I also want to highlight to you a couple of other headlines as well from Caixin, right? From Caixin, which is a Chinese newspaper, in just July of last year, and then even from CNBC, July of last year, right? Even July of last year, they're talking about changing and optimizing the Chinese property sector already. But for me, those are 口号. 口号meaning these are just words, right? From the senior leadership, right? Senior leadership. But over the course of the last few months or weeks, we have seen dramatic changes from 口号, from just words, is now into real policies. Okay? So over the course of the last few weeks or months, we have seen actual plans, actual solid implementation plans that China is stimulating and spurring investments and spending, and also specifically boosting certain subsectors like autos, like electrical appliances. So from 口号, from just words and banners, right? These are real policies. And on this slide here, what I've done is I wanted to collate all the policies, all the major policies that the Chinese government have implemented, but just over a 30-day period. So if you notice my dates, right? It ranges from 24th of January all the way from 20th of February of this year. Just one month only. These are the policies that were implemented. So that includes stopping short selling in the Chinese stock market. And that's important. Why? Because if you stop the short selling, means chances of stocks going down is actually lower because no one can short the stock anymore. And not only that, they also directly intervene by buying the stocks from the Chinese stock market. So the national team, you hear these words a lot, national team. The national team of China obviously at the request of Xi Jinping, went in and buy stocks directly. So that obviously has a big impact on the Chinese stock market. The short selling goes down or completely eliminated, and you started buying these stocks. And it goes hand in hand. And not only that, they also started to tweak RRR to inject liquidity, and also more importantly, they make it very clear that they are trying to support the Chinese property sector, which I'm sure all of you are well aware of. Okay? So I'm sure all of us have heard stories about Heng Da, Country Garden, Big Wei, and all that, the troubles they all had. Right? You must also understand that all this problem actually started from 2016. 2016 was the year when the Chinese government started to crack down on the Chinese property sector. 2016. Now it's 2024. So technically, all these Chinese property companies all started having problems roughly about 2 years ago, 2022. So it took them roughly about 6-7 years for them to finally be able to consolidate and control the Chinese property bubble. Right? So over the last 6 years, it's all restriction. If it's not enough, they just added more and more and more and more until the 3 red lines broke the camel's back. And that's when you have Heng Da, BQN, all having problems, all facing bankruptcy, right? Because it's all because of policies. But, I just want to highlight to you, once again, we use headlines. So these headlines, which I got from South China Morning Post, essentially illustrates to everyone that the policies are changing. So I want you to notice the cities, but I also want you to take note of the time, right? Shenzhen started to loosen in November of last year. Suzhou, Shanghai, Guangzhou in January of this year. Hangzhou in March of this year. Chengdu in April. Beijing in May. Look at the headlines and also look at the timing. So over a short, about 6 months or so, major cities all over China have actually loosened their property policies. And I think that's significant. Why? Because property restriction, clamping down on property sector was a major feature of Xi Jinping policies. So I want to highlight to everybody here that things are changing. Even an important thing like the Chinese property sector, from restriction, now it's all about loosening. Moving on, not only that, I'm sure all of you have heard about QE. QE is essentially government buying up bonds, government bonds, in order to support the bond market. But the Chinese government is doing a QE of sorts. But instead of buying bonds, they're actually buying land and buying apartments of Chinese property developer in order to try to clear inventory and try to stimulate demand. So the Chinese government is directly going to the private sector, buy up land and buy up Chinese apartments. Okay, so I think that in terms of policies, they've done a lot. So we've seen a dramatic change. And for those of you who are interested to invest in China, my advice to you is this. I think we need to understand what the policies are. Right? I'm sure you have heard the saying, never fight the Fed. But in China, we can twist it and say, never fight the CCP. Right? If they want to jump, you just ask how high. Right? Because that's how a lot of the government officials are thinking. So policies are changing in China. I'm not trying to say that Chinese property sector, it's fine. There's no issue whatsoever. Right? Obviously, they will take time to clear because it is a bubble after all. But I want to highlight to everybody is this, that policies are changing. Certain companies, especially the big ones, especially the ones that are SOEs or government linked, they will be saved. For those private sector ones who are on the wrong side of Xi Jinping will obviously face issues. And those guys will continue to face bankruptcy issues, liquidity issues. But the rest of them, I think they will prosper and they will grow. Okay? Next, at the end of the day, after all that talk, then we need to see what is really happening on the ground. So let's just highlight this. So this is once again a newspaper article. So people ask me, hey, is the Chinese property market dead? Volumes are down, it must be horrible, right? But once again, the newspaper article, right? It tells you that the secondary transactions in China is actually up. So what do you mean by secondary transaction? So you can actually buy, obviously, apartments directly from the developer, or you can buy from somebody else who already bought from the developer. So if you are afraid that the developer is going to go bankrupt, what did you do? And if you really need to buy a property, you buy it from the secondary market. So in China, the secondary market is actually on the uptrend. right? So this may go against what you might have seen on TikTok or Douyin or on social media, right? But the truth of the matter is, secondary markets in China is recovering, right? Albeit very, very slowly from a very, very deep valley. Okay? Moving on, I just want to touch on a few key themes which we are very positive on, right? We think that the retail sales industrial output in China continues to be very decent. So once again, it may not gel with what you are seeing from the TV, from the TikTok, and from the Douyin. But these are real data, right? Retail sales is doing fine. Is it gangbusters? Is it great 20+%? No, it's not. But is it that bad? It's not, right? So I want to highlight to you that life goes on in China. For those of you who have been to China recently, you will know, right? It may not be as bustling as before, but life goes on. Okay? Next, the themes that we like, we are also buying stocks. They are also helping themselves. Buying companies who are doing share buyback, putting your money where your mouth is. Don't just tell me how good your company is. If you really think that your company is good, start your share buyback program. So we have already seen big Chinese internet companies like JD, Baba, Tencent, putting the money where their mouth is. They are embarking on massive share buyback program, putting the money where their mouth is in order to support their own share prices as well. So this is a theme that we liked. And moving on, self-help policies to me is very important, right? Like what I mentioned earlier, US-China tension is here to stay. They have to survive themselves. So on this slide here, I just want to highlight a story which I like to tell. So this is the Huawei evolution of handphones. So there are 3 handphones here, right? Huawei P30 Pro was launched in March of 2019. You can see from the slides here, all the key components, very international. You have Chinese flags, American flags, Japanese flags all over the world. And bear in mind, 2019 was just when Trump was getting started on the whole China bashing play that was going on. Okay, that was when he first started, when he was first talking about tariff and restriction and sanction. But very quickly, just 6 months on, right, when the Huawei Mate 30 was launched in October of 2019, you can see a dramatic shift. A lot of the American flags started to drop off. So a lot of American companies started to withdraw from the component makers of Huawei. But you still can see other flags as well. So relatively international. But you just fast forward a few short years. In August of 2023, the Huawei Mate 60 was launched. This was a 5G phone that was launched last year. I'm sure those of you who have been following Chinese market, you will know it was called a miracle phone because technically speaking, in the eyes of Americans, this phone shouldn't exist because Huawei are not supposed to be able to access American or Western technology. So how did they produce the phone? Very easy. The entire phone is produced in China. The entire phone was produced in China. So that was a big shocker, right? It wasn't a shocker to the Chinese or people like us who have been monitoring the market. They sold millions and millions and millions of phones. But the Americans, this cannot be. It must be a trick of some sort. So we have this. Apple's iPhone sales in China dropped 20%. Big hoo-ha in US. But it wasn't a surprise to us. So the point I want to highlight to everybody is this. So obviously because of this US-China tension, depending on the newspaper that you read, you will have different narratives, right? Because even before Apple announced that their iPhone sales in China is going to be crap, we knew that already because the Chinese or the Hong Kong newspaper already were reporting this. But the market still took it by surprise. Why? Because it doesn't fit the narrative, right? And to me, this is also the same thing for another technology sector that I like in China, EV sector. So this is the EV market share of all the global producers of EV batteries. There's a few things I just want to highlight. You will notice, 1, that all the major players are all Asian. 2, the Chinese guys are growing at the expense of other Asian countries. Right? You can see all the flags of the Chinese getting bigger and bigger, the market share getting bigger and bigger at the expense of the Koreans and the expense of the Japanese. And I think that's significant. Because if you are like me, we think that it's going to be an EV world out there, and the most important part of an EV car is the battery. So I don't care whether you're building on behalf of BMW or Mercedes or BYD. End of the day, you need the batteries, and the batteries can only come from these guys. Okay? Moving on, my last chart here, very simply, is to remind everybody how cheap China is at this juncture. So this slide here, very simple slide. PE ratio. Price to earning ratio of China over the last 5 years or so. And I've also, more importantly, drawn a line right across. That line shows the COVID PE lows. COVID PE lows. The lows of China during COVID was in April of 2020. Do you remember, it was just 4 years ago, do you remember what were you doing at April of 2020? I remember I was doing at April of 2020. I was running around in Singapore. Everybody was in a lockdown. I was trying to find face masks, hand sanitizer, and toilet paper. In that order. Right? That was the world that all of us were living in at that point in time. Nobody knew who could survive. We didn't know this thing called COVID-19 was still Wuhan virus at the point in time. No vaccination. We didn't even know we could survive the year. And that was how low the market traded at that point in time. But if you look at China right now, valuation of China is exactly at that point in time. But I think the world is in a very different place. There's no such thing as COVID, or rather nobody is worried about COVID-19 anymore. I'm sure all of us here are already traveling. And the fact that all of us here in this small little room together, breathing the same air, already tells us this is a brave new world. And yet, China valuation is as cheap as what it was during the COVID times. For those of you who wants to buy cheap and good, I give you China. Okay, with that, I come to the end of my prepared remarks. Thank you very much for your attention.